Morning and welcome everybody. Here in the room, Manuela Caiani, professor of political science at the Department of Political Science and Sociology of the Scuola Normale Superiore, and Francesca Feo, that who will come in a while, who is a PhD student of our program. So first of all, we really would like to thank everybody for the participation, all the keynotes and the discussants and the participants, the paper givers, for participating and contributing to create this conference together with us. We have been very sorry to move everything online, but we were convinced that it was extremely important to go on with this conference, which deals with a very important topic, which has a strong political, social, and scientific and normative relevance. So in these 2 days, good morning, it will be a very intensive conference, and in which we will address the topic of the complex relation between populism and gender and feminism from different angles. We have tried, as you have seen from the program, to combine a conference, an event, including contributions coming from different methodological approach and data collection technique and epistemological approach, and papers covering not only Europe, but also other countries that usually are not so well known concerning many political sociology topics, and these in particular, and also so countries beyond Europe. Just a couple of words on our department and why it is particularly important for us to host this conference here. Although despite, let's say, its young age, the Faculty of Political Science and Sociology at the Scuola Normale Superiore has already established an international reputation, especially in the field of social movement. And therefore here we have many, including the staff, many PhD students and postdocs who focus on social movement studies, and for whom this topic of the conference is particularly relevant. From those who focus on political parties and radical right politics, who are dealing with the changing role of women in the role of in the leadership position of these parties, which somehow is a puzzle due to the tradition of populist radical right-wing parties that are characterized, as Muda said in 2007, by voters and members and roles made by male. But also we have all our PhD students and postdocs and also teaching staff who deal with from below importance of gender in movement mobilization, not only feminist mobilization against the gender construction coming from above, from populist parties, but also social movement mobilization in which the role of women is particularly important, also on other kind of issues like Fridays for Futures on the climate change and so on and so forth. Lastly, we have all the young scholars here who focus on the consequences of populism in power, and therefore are focusing on the policies made by populist parties. So this is to say that these the topics we are going to address in these 2 days of intense conference are extremely relevant for us, and we hope that you also will enjoy the combination that we have tried to create. So I will leave now the floor to Francesca, who will continue with a couple of words introduction.
So hello everyone, and well, a warm welcome also from me. And I'm really happy. Well, I didn't really see you here, but to see you all gathered here, and even though in this quite limited format. And really, thank you very much to every one of you to, like, enduring with us throughout all the post moments and the difficulties that we encountered in the setup of this conference. And for me, these 2 days are really important, also because they come are pure highlight after a quite grim and weird year, I think, for everyone. And I'm really happy to share all of them with you. Now, just a few words, I think, even though we didn't really intend that, but the timing of the conference is also quite good. And today, as probably many of you know, is the International Human Rights Day. And also a few weeks ago, I'm really sure that all of us followed closely the amazing Black Umbrella mobilization of women against the populist radical right government in Poland, just an example. And what happened during this mobilization, what we saw through the media, pictures, and so on, is that the movement really managed to hold huge marches. They really managed to build broad coalitions. We have seen pictures of public bus drivers showing and changing their banners, they screen for the destination with slogans in support of the movement. We have seen how farmers came out with their tractors in the fields in little towns around the countries in solidarity to the movement, and also how many strikes were organized in many sectors, in many labor sectors. And of course, not to mention the transnational solidarity as well that the movement received throughout these weeks. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that is because I really think that these instances, these instances, yes, not only show how right-wing populists can use anti-feminist backlash to divide and rule, but it also showed how feminist resistance could really branch out into society-wide movements and really confront on their position like a populist government. Maybe, I don't know, perhaps it's just, a thought of mine, but I think that in building this broad coalition, perhaps even the women movement have learned to incorporate central elements of the populist logic that they are trying to fight back. And perhaps we will have time to, discuss and kind of ponder about this topic, these issues during the conference. I don't want to speak too much about something that I actually don't know very well. I'm not really an expert of that. But for me, the reason why I'm, making this example is that really these women protest against the populist movement, and the extent that they managed to reach, it was the biggest mobilization since 1989 in the country. I think it makes really visible how unpredictable and dynamics the nexus between populism and gender is. So, as we know, these politics really touch upon a wall of political spheres, and all of them are quite entangled to gender in a way or the other. So both populism and feminism, are complex and multifaceted forms of politics, and today they are globally on the rise, both of them. So I think that in our studies of these forms of politics and the politics and their nexus, we ourselves have to be equally complex and multifaceted. And this is why I'm very happy to share and to have all of you here in for these 2 days, because we are, I think, we are going to see and to witness basically a very nice conference that is international, interdisciplinary, and methodological diverse, as Manuela just said. And of course, we could have still some effort has to be done to kind of overcome a little bit the Eurocentrism that we always have in European academia, but I think we are also for that in a good path. And I'm really, really looking forward to hear all your contributions, your panel, and the panels. Now, I would like to share with you, this is just a last reflection. And it's just something that happened to me in the run-up of the conference. At one point, I received an email from a male colleague. In a way, puzzled me very much. And he wrote something which I will quote. And he wrote, I think a conference on gender with 99% female participants is a good thing for society, is a good thing for gender research, but not a good thing for female researchers. Unfortunately, you are a minority, and locking yourself into a niche topic does not help, in my opinion. It ghettoizes you. in relation to the mainstream, you are less likely to have an impact in the discipline. All the more so if you use post-positive theories and qualitative methods. This is a bad, but this is the reality. So what I'm going with this. Of course, like I really certainly admired in a way the self-assurance of this colleague, and I wish I could have only, half of it whenever I think about what reality actually is. But I think that if he will listen, to us in the coming 2 days, he will see that really, his arguments really misses the point. We will listen to, we will discuss, we will engage and disagree even over like a number of topics with the varieties of approaches. And all of them are legitimate and shed light on important aspects. Our exchange is of huge value to the social science, even though 99% of it come from, well, women researchers. And I'm actually also very happy, we just added some male researchers to the panel just for the sake of diversity. I just wanted to tell this. Of course, it's a joke, but more seriously, I really think that this message perhaps has something to tell us, which is that we still have a lot of work to do, not only in our research, not only perhaps in the politics of our countries if we are willing to do so, but also in the academic community that we work in and we want to speak to. I think that within the spheres, our conference is in itself a little tiny instance of gender politics. And perhaps we will also find some time to, address these topics during the wrap-up or the meeting, like the collective meeting that we will have this evening. So really, like, to conclude, let me just, tell again and thank all of you to be here. And I'm really, really, happy that this is coming together now. And now I will just leave the floor again to Manuela to introduce our first keynote speakers for today.
Okay, so thank you everybody. And now the first keynote for today is Eva Anduiza, who is a professor of political science at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, and who is focusing in particular on from electoral, let's say, to protest and media participation in advanced democracies. And her work on populist attitudes among voters is extremely important for today's conference. And her current work on the Me Too mobilizations, the changes in attitudes toward gender equality and feminism over time, and the role played by feminist mobilization in these changes is extremely timely. So it is a pleasure for us to have you here. Unfortunately, we couldn't have you in Florence physically, you and also Andrea. But thank you again for this speech of today, and the content, again, it is extremely relevant for most of us, and it will be about the role played by modern sexism in explaining the support for the radical right. So thank you, Eva, and you have, let's say, how much time do you want, 30 to 40 minutes, and then we will open the floor to the question and answer and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm super excited and super honored to have been asked to make this keynote in this conference, which is very timely for me too, because it somewhat connects my past line of research on populism with what I consider now my current and future research. So what I'm going to present here is mostly work that I have started to do only a few years and pretty much work in progress. Let me see if I can share the screen with you. Okay, and let me first, before I forget, let me thank Manuela and Francesca for having, persisted in the organization of this conference, because it's pretty hard year for one, and many conferences have been cancelled. So I think it's really great that we've managed to be here today, and also to congratulate them for bringing all these people in the list. I can see the list of participants that is extensive. Now there are a lot of competing Zoom events, so it's really great to see all these people and also some familiar faces too. So so let's get started. So what I would like to do today with you is actually discuss a little bit this relationship between sexism and the far-right vote, taking Spain as a case, but also addressing some more general questions. So I'd like to take three different perspectives on the matter. So the first one is to speak to all the literature that connects the rise of the far-right parties to cultural backlash. So this is a line of research that already has a few years, that has been there for a while, and that is quite established. And what is of interest for me here is that this idea that far-right parties rise as a consequence of cultural change towards more progressive values has mostly been looked at from an aggregate perspective. And I was wondering whether we can actually identify some microdynamics of this gender backlash process. So is this only a matter of different groups that become more mobilized at different time points? Or can we actually see that people change in the way they relate, for instance, to gender equality as a result of these backlash effects? So that's the first thing I'm going to be addressing in this talk. The second one is to speak to this also important strand in the literature that has found out that there is actually a pervasive gender gap in the far-right vote. And this has been found to be with different degrees of intensity, but it's quite a fundamental element in the literature on far-right vote. So here, there have been several attempts to try to explain why is it that women vote less to these far-right parties. And there has been attempts to introduce some mechanisms, but there is actually always some gender gap that remains even after controls for a number of variables such as education or different levels of interest, etc. And what I want to do is to see whether actually this can be accounted for by attitudes of sexism. So whether sexism is a mediator that can explain this gap. And then the third perspective I want to take has to do with actually looking at sexism as a predictor of far-right vote, which, as you all probably know, the literature on far-right has paid a lot of attention to economic factors and also to cultural factors related particularly to migration. And there is a debate on the gender element, but the empirical attention in terms of explaining electoral choice, looking at attitudes towards gender equality has been more restricted, I would say, particularly in Europe, because in the US we do have already a few works that point to the relevance of sexism, different forms of sexism, when one wants to understand what has been going on in politics in this country. But in Europe, we have less work because there are less data, and that's an important take-home point of my presentation today. And we need more data on prejudice and sexism as a prejudice to understand what is going on in terms of the anti-feminist reaction that, you know, it's an important component of far-right politics. So here I'm going to be interested in particular to see what kind of sexism is the right or the more adequate or appropriate form of sexism to explain far-right politics. And for instance, in the US, attention has been paid particularly to hostile forms of sexism or ambivalent sexism, because actually the discourse of the right, or what you could identify as the equivalent for the far right in that party, takes these forms of sexism, while in other cases, like for instance in Spain, other forms of sexism like modern sexism may be more appropriate to better reflect what is going on. So I would make three arguments in the presentation. The first one is that there are indeed individual levels of gender backlash that involve changes within individual a long time. So there is an initial reduction of sexism that follows processes of feminist mobilization. And then there is an increase in levels of sexism that follows a far-right mobilization. I emphasize the word following because I won't be able to address the issue of whether these individual changes, these within individual changes along time, are actually due to this process of feminist mobilization or to these processes of far-right mobilization. But the temporal sequence is there in the way that is consistent with what we would call an individual dynamic of gender backlash. So that would be the first argument. The second argument is that sexism actually explains out the gender gap in far-right vote in Spain completely, and no other attitudinal predictor does so. That means that men are more likely to vote for Vox because they have higher levels of sexism, and once you account for that, there is no more gender gap. And then the third element is that sexism is not only a significant, but it's a powerful and very robust predictor of far-right vote. And it's actually the most important predictor, only we don't know because we don't usually have the right measures to assess its importance. This is, of course, for the case I have analyzed, but I would be really looking forward to seeing more data on this. So I'm tempted to say I was feeling a bit bad about, sharing with you a lot of data. It's going to be a keynote that is going to bring a lot of data back. But then after hearing Francesca and her male colleague being concerned that we are, not dealing with reality in the proper quantitative way as we should, maybe you can send him the presentation, or maybe not, as you see. So anyway, that's only a joke to please excuse that there will be quite a few slides with numbers and graphs and stuff. So I'm going to focus on modern sexism, and some of you maybe, and probably all of you, are familiar with the concept that was developed in the 1990s. And when I was looking for a way to measure in our panel survey attitudes towards gender equality, I was surprised by this measure because it was before actually Vox started, but I thought that it tapped attitudes toward gender equality in a way that was more subtle than other more traditional indicators. As you know, with sexism, we follow the literature and the measurement on racism, and so more explicit forms of racism and sexism have been replaced by more subtle forms. And this is a way to measure these subtle forms. And this concept of modern sexism, as initially originated by Swim and her colleagues, involves three dimensions. First, there is a denial of continued discrimination against women. Then there is an antagonism and rejection of women's demands, and most often take the form of protest or social movement activity, feminist activity. And then there is a lack of support for policies that are designed to reduce discrimination. So these three dimensions are measured in a battery like the one you see here. That's the battery we have used. It's 8 items that try to tap on these three components. Most of them are directed to the denial of discrimination, like, for instance, women often miss out good jobs due to sexual discrimination. And then there are items on how much attention is given, or how much we understand that there is unease among women's organizations because of this discrimination. And then there are also items on how much attention these are getting from the government and the media. So we just take this concept of modern sexism because it's already been assessed in terms of its psychometric properties, and we measure it to tap on this sexist prejudice. It's also very interesting, and this only came to me clear after I started hearing about Vox, that this modern sexism battery taps really well into the far-right discourse of some parties, and certainly of Vox. This is an example of a headline in which Vox reacts against the feminist demonstrations of the 8th of March, denying that there is violence against women and, attacking feminism, but, at the same time, saying that they are, of course, in favor of equal rights and duties and opportunities between men and women. So there you can see that there is no actually any discourse emphasizing inequality of rights, but there is actually this denial that there is a specific problem that affects women because they are women. The data we use is a panel for which we have 3 waves. The panel actually starts before 2017, but it is in 2017 when we start measuring sexism. So we have 3 waves, one in 2017, one in 2018, and one in 2019. We interviewed roughly the same 1,400 citizens, Spanish citizens. There are quotas of age. So because this panel started 10 years ago, and it's an online administered panel, at that time, we only interviewed the part of the population that had relatively decent levels of internet use. And we also applied sex and education quotas. And then we have these 3 time points measures for modern sexism and vote choice, and a number of other controls. So this is the data we're going to be using to analyze these 3 questions I was mentioning at the beginning. There are 3 waves, the same individual interviewed 3 times. So we are not very trustful of our panel data because, as you know, panel data have a number of problems. This is an internet-based panel. So people that do not have access to the internet are left out. We also have just part of the age population, not older people. So there are a number of issues here. So we are concerned about this. And this is a slide to show you that it's actually not bad to see what is going on from an aggregate level, which is not what you want to do with panel, because for this it's better to have cross-sectional surveys taken at different time points. For panel, what you want to do is to look at how individuals change, not to have the aggregate figure. But even then, I wanted to share with you that the aggregate figures do not depart from standard, usually considered high-quality cross-sectional surveys. So this is a graph that depicts the evaluation of the economic situation on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis, we have the different waves of our panel, and also the different barometers of the Center for Sociological Research in blue. And as you can see, the lines are very close to each other. So we are tracking what the Center for Sociological Research is doing, except for May 2020, when the Center for Sociological Research changed the sample, the interview method. So we started doing interviews on the phone rather than face-to-face. And this also involved important changes in the sample size of and the sample composition of the survey. And they also changed the wording. They said, how do you evaluate the economic situation, leaving aside the COVID pandemics? So, then they had this really very high percentage of people that consider the economic situation to be good. And our panel considers that most people, that the level of economic perceptions deteriorated significantly, as honestly you would expect if you kept the sample and the indicators similar. So this is just to try to convince you that our panel data are not too bad, okay? Are not too bad even for this descriptive purpose, which is not the main purpose of the analysis I'm going to be presenting today. Okay, so let's go to Spain. This is Spain on the 8th of March of 2018. This was a massive demonstration that took place all over the country. There have been, of course, other demonstrations in the 8th of March in previous years, actually for many years. But this really was a qualitative leap in the sense that, you know, the number of people mobilized in the demonstration and also in the strike was really very, very important. Shortly after, in 1 year after, we have a new party in parliament, and we had 2 elections. I'm going to tell you a bit about it now. 2 elections in 2019. So first with 24 seats and then with 52 seats. And this is a party that entered. If you ask people why do we have this new radical right party in Spain, which was supposed to be the country that did not have radical right parties or far right parties in parliament. It was considered a European exception in this respect. There will be reference especially to the territorial conflict with Catalonia. So the idea that because of the pro-independence mobilization that had been taking place in the years before, following the economic recession and a number of political events. This was actually the response to this Catalan conflict. So it's a party that has a strong Spanish nationalist component, and this is very much present in their campaigns. Secondly, you would hear probably arguments about immigration. So immigration has typically not been an issue in Spanish politics, as it has been in other European parties. But this party made several continued references to immigration, as framing it as an invasion and trying to put the defense of the Spanish borders in the agenda, etc. So if people tell you about Vox and why Vox, you probably will hear these two arguments as the explanation. And what I want to argue here is that there is a third explanation, which is actually pretty important too, which has to do with the reaction to this important, extraordinary feminist mobilization that we had just had. So to go back to my 3 arguments, let's have a look at gender backlash at the individual level. Let's first have, a bit of a more precise picture of the key events and the panel waves. So we have 3 panel waves, as I was telling you, usually in early June, late March is the time when our panel takes place. So we had one in 2017 where we started measuring levels of sexism. Then we had 2018 with the first massive 8th of March demonstration, and our second wave for this analysis. And then we had 2019, which was full of things. There was a second, even more massive demonstration in the 8th of March, followed by general elections the 28th of April, where Vox entered parliament for the first time. They had already made an institutional leap in December 2018, entering one regional parliament in Andalusia, an important region in Spain. But this was at the national level, and it was an important change in the party system. Then we re-interviewed our individuals. So after this massive demonstration and the first presence of Vox in parliament, and then there was again the second election with an even higher proportion of seats for Vox. Okay, so what we expect actually is that between this wave and this wave, because of the effect of this, and this is within quotation marks because we cannot prove this causal connection, but it would be an empirical observation of the fact that the 8th of March of 2018 actually made people more aware of, discrimination and the need for protest and the need for policies to correct discrimination. We would expect that sexism would go down, okay, in this wave with respect to the previous one. While 1 year after, we would expect the backlash. So an increase in levels of sexism, right? That's our expectation if there is this kind of individual dynamic of gender backlash. And this is indeed what we find. So in this graph, you have in the vertical axis, the change with respect to the previous wave. So 0 means a stability in the level of sexism. Positive values means the level of sexism has increased within the individual. Negative values means the level of sexism has declined within individuals. So between 2017 and 2018, we see that there is actually a decline in the level of sexism. And between 2018 and 2019, we see the backlash with an increase in the change of modern sexism. So I'm terribly horrible on time. So this slide just tries to look more carefully at whether this backlash happens for different socio-demographic groups, and it does. So it's there almost for everybody with a few exceptions. I'm not going to elaborate on this because I want to have time for the Q&A. So I can skip this, and then if you want, we can go back to this. Okay. But the point for the first argument is made, which is that there was this kind of individual level change towards less sexism first, following the first feminist mobilization, and then towards more sexism following what we would call the backlash. The gender gap explained. Okay, so here, and apologies for the long table. What we do is, it's a very simple model in which vote for Vox is the dependent variable. And then we introduce a number of predictors, among which there is a female here. And what you can see when you only introduce a female as a predictor is that there is actually this typical gender gap in Spain. So women are less likely to vote for Vox than are men. And if you introduce some controls like age, education, or socio-demographics like age or education, you see that the gender gap persists. There is still a significant effect. And then if you introduce attitudinal controls such as ideology, nativism, or attitudes towards migration, Spanish nationalism, or populism, you actually still have a significant amount of gender gap here. And it's only when you introduce sexism in the model that you get rid of the gender gap. So this shows that, at least for the case of Spain, we can explain the gender gap because men are more sexist, and you can see this here, than women. And as we shall see in the next question, sexism matters sexism matters for vote for Vox. So again, apologies for the this is even more terrible than the one before. Okay, what we do is, of course, I'm arguing that sexism is important to understand Vox, but it could be that Vox is making people more sexist, and in particular its voters. So how do we handle this typical endogeneity problem? So panel data are useful for this. They don't get rid of all the problems, and they are not a panacea for dealing with endogeneity, but they can show whether things can resist the alternative explanation. Okay, so in this model, what we do is we take a vote for Vox in 1919 as the dependent variable. Okay, because Vox entered only in 2019 in Parliament, we don't have vote recall for Vox at several time points. Okay, however, we do have measures of different predictors of vote for Vox at different time points, and that's what we do. For instance, in this first model, what we do is we take the value of the explanatory variables 1 year before, so in 2018, okay, to explain vote for Vox in 2019. So we lag the variable, the explanatory variable, and then we see whether, you know, this has an effect. And what you can see is that sexism is, together with left-right, self-location, and with Spanish nationalism, the most important predictor, okay? It's not populism, it's not nativism. If you lag 2 years, because we started asking on sexism 2 years before, you can see that this is again against the case. Okay, it's particularly ideology, nationalism, and in this case, in third place, is sexism. Okay, you can also look at how people have changed in their attitudes, which is actually related to the gender backlash argument that we were putting forward. So here is how much people have changed in their attitudes and whether this predicts or not vote for choice. Okay, so this is the first year difference. And what you see here is that it's mostly changes in the level of sexism that account for choosing Vox as a party in the vote recall measure of 2019. Also ideology, but you know, mostly sexism. And if you take the 2 year difference, so how much people have changed in their levels of sexism between 2017 and 2019, this effect is even more important. Okay, and then you can also see whether changes between in levels of sexism between 2017 and 2018 actually predict vote in 2019. And you see that, you know, again, sexism is a very robust predictor. The effect stays there, and for no other independent variable, there is a significant effect. So there is a lot going on in terms of sexism, prejudice, changes in the levels of sexist prejudices that explained the choice for Vox as a party. So more or less on time. The conclusions. So we find individual dynamics of sexism that are consistent with these individual level processes of gender backlash. We find that most individuals, regardless of their background characteristics, become less sexist between 2017 and 2018. And we assume this must have to do with the fact of, you know, these huge demonstrations taking place, but we cannot prove that it's due to that only. And then they become more sexist between 2018 and 2019, which we also associate with the backlash reaction at the individual level and at the aggregate level with Vox appearing to the political scene. Secondly, modern sexism is the only attitudinal variable that wipes out the gender gap. It may be because it would require additional controls that we haven't introduced, or it could be that Spain is different, but I usually don't think so. And then thirdly, I'll be happy in any case to see votes for other cases. And then thirdly, sexism seems to be also in this case among the most important explanations of far-right vote. So if we don't look into that, we have a poor understanding of what is going on. It's at least as important as left-right location, and it's much more important at the individual level than nationalism, nativism, or populism. And I think that is a significant finding. I also would like to emphasize before closing that it is very important that we do have this kind of measures of prejudice included into standard surveys, and this has so far done relatively rarely. There are a bit more data in the US than in Europe, but especially in comparative perspective, this is something we are badly lacking, and this is why it's really good news that the new European Social Survey module will be on this kind of attitudes towards gender equality. So to the team that proposed this module, thank you very much, because it's I think something that we badly need to understand what is going on in European politics at the moment. So thanks very much. I'm really looking forward to your comments and questions. And thank you for your patience with all the tables and numbers.
Thank you very much. Eva, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So now I would like to, so I'm going to moderate a little bit the Q&A. So please don't be shy, and of course use the chat or raise your hands with the function to pose these questions. Okay, so we have a first question. I think I saw it by Julia Roth. Julia, the floor is yours if you want.
Shall I use the mic?
Sure.
Okay. Hi. Thank you very much for this insightful talk and sharing your data. I think this is a very relevant study. But my perspective is I'm not an empirical social scientist, so I'm more interested in. So I'm looking at narratives in right-wing populism and dynamic paradoxes. So I would be interested in how far your data provides insight also into the entanglement of sexism and nationalism, nativism, populism, because I think it's sometimes hard to divide these levels or these factors, since nativism is often based, if we think of the connection, you know, of the female body for reproduction, all these patterns that we know. Was that of interest, or are there some things you found out, or was it rather based on that sexism aspect? Thank you.
Do you want me to respond, or shall we collect?
Maybe we could, yeah, maybe we collect like another couple of questions. We do in like battery of 3. I think it could be a good way to go. So I see also Elena Pavan.
Hi, and thank you for this amazing presentation. I loved it. And I actually had to say, I have 4 micro questions on the operationalization, more on the quantity side, but I do actually, one of them was actually the same question that Julia has just posed about the interaction between the predictors that you've put in into 2 different models for your hypothesis 2 and 3. I would also like to ask you, if I might have got it wrong, but you were measuring with a set of indicators modern sexism in Spain with items that actually refer to other contexts like America and the States. So I wonder where that choice come from and how you position like modern sexism in a context of asking people to think about another context, especially if that was put like in a battery of items. So you have the problem that following items might still be referring to the context. Then I would like you to comment on the fact that you measured modern sexism in the same way for men and women. So using the same items for both genders, whereas someone might argue that modern sexism can take different shades or articulations. And then how do you connect the interplay of individual behaviors with the macro context? Have you tested, I don't know, any structural variable among predictors in other models, and what ended up showing? Thanks a lot. I really like your presentation.
Thank you.
Eva, do you want to respond now?
Yeah,
or should
perhaps.
Yeah,
perhaps
okay.
I can
and then we go on with the other one. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, on the connection between nativism, populism, and migration, those are actually empirically related. Not in a simple way, so in a fairly complex way, but that has not been the subject of this of this analysis. So we've put that aside. We have an ongoing paper on this question, not with modern sexism, but with other attitudes towards attitudes towards gender equality. And what we try to do there is to try exactly to see how these attitudes make people, we can identify different bundles of attitudes configuration in different people. So there's actually work on that. Only it has not been the focus of my presentation here, because I was more concerned about, you know, just looking at sexism, because a lot of people have looked at populism, a lot of people have looked at nativism, and we don't have this wealth of data for sexism. Which takes me to the question posed by Elena. Why do we use this US-based indicator? And I have to say, we do that all the time in electoral behavior, not without contestation or unease sometimes, but you know, there is a lot of concepts that have traveled from the US to European, starting with party identification. For this in particular, this concept had been, or this battery had been validated for Spain. So there have been social psychologists that have analyzed this and seen that it can actually be applied to Spain. So we based on that. We don't think that we probably would have drafted the items differently if we were to do that from scratch. But they work well. So in that sense, we trust the work done by psychologists. On measuring things differently for men and women, well, you could do that, but then you would have the problem of never being quite sure of whether the differences that you're finding are because, you know, there are substantial differences out there, or because the measures are exactly not equivalent. So in that sense, we follow what most people that relate sexism with electoral behavior do, which is the same, use the same battery of indicators for men and women. And the interplay between the individual and the contextual element is actually the elephant in the room here, in the sense that in the end of the day, we do have only two macro units here, which are 2 years, the 2 time points. One that is characterized by the mobilization of the feminist movement, and another one that is also characterized by that, but also by the mobilization of the far right. So there is so much we can do with only 2 points from the perspective of analyzing that. So we can only say that our analysis is consistent with the arguments that are carried out at the aggregate level. But with this kind of research, we can say much about how macro events affect behavior. We would need more comparative data, larger sample sizes with more degrees of feminist mobilization to see what is the consequence there. Which could be done. It's only that we cannot do it in the context of our paper here. Thank you very much. Those are great questions.
Okay, so I think let's collect another couple of questions. I see like a raised hand by Marcella Corsi. So the floor is yours, and then we have also a question in the chat that I would read out loud perhaps after Marcella, and I have a question myself at the end.
Thank you, Francesca. I'll be very quick. Thank you for the presentation. I just apologize that I arrived a little bit late, so if my question is inappropriate, I apologize in advance. I just wanted to know if you have a thought of using information stemming from the Eurobarometer. You mentioned the importance of the European Social Survey, but I wonder whether we should make pressures to Eurobarometer to collect data in these directions. It would be a valuable tool, in my view, but I would like to know your opinion. Thank you so much.
Let me read the question. Just a second, I need to find it back. Where is it? Here. Okay. So from Silvia Gancheva. I hope the pronunciation is right. So thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. I'm interested in whether the impact of feminist movements, social movements in 2019 was somehow weaker than in 2018. In addition, how did Vox address the feminist movement in both years, respectively? Also, from a methodological perspective, how much attrition did you experience from the panel data, and whether this is something you have addressed in your data? Thank you. Should I also pose my question, or you prefer to reply?
As you want. Depends on how we are doing on time.
Actually we are fine on time. It's
okay, then
10,
I can
so,
ask. I can ask.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So for Marcella, yes, I actually think it would be great if the Eurobarometer incorporated more of this. I know that the Eurobarometer has good measures, at least at one time point, on stereotypes and stereotyping. And certainly, I would be all in favor of incorporating more of this information. It's or these measures. One of the things we at some point may have to discuss is that this is a pretty heavy battery. I mean, it's 8 items with agreement scales, and it's hard to incorporate this. So many comparative data only introduce maybe 1 or 2 items, and we as political scientists tend to do this. Psychologists tend to do less, and you can actually, I think you can actually see that good measures pay off. So we would need to devote some time to think about what is it that we need to measure carefully. But I would be certainly more in favor of having the Eurobarometer incorporate more questions like this. On Sylvia's question, thank you very much. So no, the mobilization of 2019 was actually larger than the mobilization of 2019. So there were more people in the streets, but the backlash had already started. So in 2019, you have simultaneously more feminist mobilization and then more backlash. When you see the decline is in 2020, but of course the 8th of March had already been in the context of the initial context of the pandemics, and it was a different situation, and then there the turnout declined. We have some attrition. I'm not sure I can give you the figure right now very quickly, but it's not very dramatic, let's say, because most of these people are people that. So we do this through a firm that provides this kind of internet user samples, and they usually have them pretty well trained. So they tend to stay, and we lose them, but after a few years. So we are periodically refreshing the panel. The thing here is that we actually, if we lose them, they do not. We cannot use them for making this with individual variation analysis. So I take the comment as an opportunity to see to what extent there are differences in those that leave the panel and those that do not in terms of sexism. That would be an important thing to look at. So thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you. And so I also see Francesca Scrinzi raised your hand. Perhaps you want to, take the floor, or otherwise I would read the question from the chat.
Please do read the question, Francesca. Thanks.
Okay. So I mean, also easy, Francesca and Francesca, quite easy transformation. So thank you very much, Eva. This come across as a very different, from what has been found in other European countries. I was wondering, what about the issue of gender equality in the Vox ideology? One can think that pro-feminist attitudes in the population could be used by Vox to nationalize the issue of gender equality by targeting migrants or as rapists, rather than denying the violence against women. Violence against women is a problem indeed. Perhaps this has not been possible for Vox because the huge feminism mobilization made it clear and visible that violence against women is not perpetrated by migrants only. Also thinking about the Manada, I guess. That it cross-cut social divisions. And maybe I just, take the occasion as well to jump in for my question, which is, I mean, it's more probably like a point to reflect a little bit on, because, I mean, thank you very much. The presentation was super interesting. I was wondering, you only talks about the mobilization and the feminist mobilization and the 8th of March as a trigger for developments of certain type of individual attitudes. But what it would be nice to have data to see this type of dynamics in different contexts, because what I think it's also perhaps something to take into account is that what we see now in the political and party system in Spain is not only a rising populist radical right parties with obviously very sexist kind of agenda or anti-gender agenda, if we want, but at the same time a very, very huge mobilization from the side of of a left-wing populist parties which is now in government. So of course there is as well a kind of highest a rising salience of the issue, and that create very, very big political polarization. So perhaps also I was wondering if this could be something that first of all can be measured, so the type of interaction and also the type of alliances between the feminist movement and institutional forces in power at the moment, and how this could actually account even more to make sense of the data that you just provided us. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the super interesting questions. So on the first question on how Vox actually connects these different issues, most absolutely it does connect. For instance, the issue of gender violence with migration and trying to refer as often as possible to migrants as responsible for these gender aggressions. I'm not sure how this will unfold on time, because there are many contentious issues regarding gender in Spain, but regarding gender violence, people are pretty much in support of measures to prevent gender violence. So this has been an issue that has been made visible in Spain for a long time, since we started counting how many women are killed by their partners or ex-partners in 2003. And people, I think, have been educated in a way in the consideration of this as a problem that needs to be addressed. So Vox is really pretty much alone in this discourse about denying gender violence and connecting it to migration. But that doesn't mean their discourse cannot engage people, or that public opinion can turn into a different, more polarized distribution. So we will have to see how this unfolds, because until Vox, there was agreement among all political forces that this needed to be addressed. But now there is a speaker for this, being not considered anymore as a legitimate policy because it goes against men and these things that they say. So we will see how this goes, no? And from this point of view, I think all analysis on discourses and narratives are very important, because in the end of the day, my my argument or my paper does not speak to what comes first, whether, you know, there are changes in preferences that are changing, and then this brings new parties or new issues in the agenda, or it's the other way around. And I would probably be more convinced by the other way around, because these short-term public opinion changes tell you that people are reactive to what is going on. So they are reactive to the mobilization of women, and they are reactive to the appearance of Vox. So that's something where, you know, this kind of research on how these issues are framed in the public sphere is I think very, very important. Then on Francesca Feo's question on the different contexts and the wave of mobilization, yeah, here again there is a lot to be said on why this protest started in 2018 and why they continued in 2019, and why what is it that brings us there. And I think we have to go back to several ideas. One is that we are a country that enjoys protesting in the States. That creates a base from where to start. We also had the 8th of the 15M, the Indignados, a few years ago, and there are some connections. For instance, that indicate that feminists had to struggle very much in the 15M to get their message heard, and to I mean, it wasn't as inclusive as one might think from the outside. And there are theories there that say that it is precisely when women are excluded, particularly in realignment moments, and Spanish politics is undergoing a moment of political realignment very clearly, where women have been you know, left out. And so this was a way of making clear we are here, and these are our demands. And then you also have this kind of short-term triggers that also play a crucial role, I think, in mobilizing. So the Manada case that was mentioned, I think, by the first Francesca, was also important. This was a case of a collective rape that was the trial took place a few months before the first massive 8th of March. And that probably generated the moral outrage necessary to make this protest very massive. But it's also true that we have had trials like La Manada very often before, and never this outrage poured out in this way. So, you know, there were probably other processes that had been going on for a while out there. So yes, we need to go back to different processes that have more of a sequence to understand what is going on. And we also probably need to understand, and this is also related to the 15M and to the role of more institutional feminism. So it's probably the connection between the work of the institutional feminism, particularly, I think, in the Socialist Party. There are people in the audience that know a lot about this, with the mobilization of the practices that started in or were displayed during the Indignados, and with the increasing pluralism of feminism that also explain the massive protests. So yeah, a lot going on to understand from a more macro perspective what we do see at the individual level.
Thank you very much for the super insightful reply. And so we are now time-wise, we still have, in theory, 15 minutes left. So if there are still questions, I would say we could perhaps take like the last round, and maybe we also take some time for a little break before moving on with the panels, which probably is also needed. So if there are still people in the audience that wants to pose questions now, or yeah. Yeah. Marta Fraile, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to Eva for a very, very interesting talk. And I don't want to be repetitive, but what I like it most of the talk and what I find more, let's say, fascinating is this reactive capacity of the public towards mobilization and towards the political campaign of a non-mainstream party. So I wonder if in the paper that you're writing, Eva, you could be a little bit more specific about how substantial is the change across time in sexism, because it seems to be small, the change, but I couldn't figure out the range of variation of the whole indicator, because I assume that you constructed a general indicator out of the 8 items. So perhaps you could make your argument stronger if you reflect on the magnitude of this change towards, decreasing and increasing, to make the link more clear. And I may have many others comments, but I just leave the floor for someone else. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marta. So yeah, it's true. The change is not massive. So there are different ways to show this. So from a descriptive perspective, aggregate descriptive perspective, the index goes from 0 to 1. Okay, and these are the average values for the different waves. You have a tip of 2020 here, where you see that we are not getting any better. So there was this little decline in average levels in 2017 and 2018, and then there is this more substantial increase in the years after. Is this a lot, or is this a little? Another way to look at it, for instance. No. Is this way. Okay, so here you have the distribution of the wave of 2018 with respect to 1 year after, and there you see that it goes towards, there is a displacement towards the left side of the 0 point that reflects stability. So in the 0 point are the people that did not move in the average levels of sexism, and then here are people that reduce their levels of sexism. And here you have the backlash. So the June 2019 with people moving towards higher levels of sexism. Is this a lot, or is this a little? There are 2 ways to answer that. One is to compare it with other attitudes, and we could do that. So I take this as a possibility to compare it with other attitudes to see if this is a substantial change or not a substantial change. The other one is to see whether this is consequential. Okay. And this is what we do here in this with this analysis, in particular with the analysis of the difference. Does changing your level of sexism make you more likely to vote for Vox? Yes, it does in a substantial way, particularly the increase in the level of sexism between the first wave and the third wave. But there are more intuitive ways of presenting this. So I take this also as a very useful idea to present the data better. So how important is this, both in terms of the magnitude of the change and the consequences? Thank you, Marta.
Thank you to you, Eva.
You can feel we are friends.
Let me just, so there is a follow-up question by Marcella. Should I read it out loud, or Marcella, you want to go ahead?
if you don't mind, I go ahead directly, because I don't know whether it's clear what I've written. So I couldn't read very well, Eva, but if I read correctly, in your logistic exercise, there was a variable concerning populism, and it was written in small letters, Podemos, correct? So what I wanted to understand is basically the role of Podemos in your logistics exercise, in a sense that this is mainly a question from an Italian perspective, because as you probably know, in Italy we have something similar, at least in theory, to Podemos, that is Movimento 5 Stelle. And as a matter of fact, there is actually a sort of osmosis between Movimento 5 Stelle and the far right, in the sense that many people who originally proposed themselves as new, as alternative to the system and so on, then moved through time into the far right part of the parliament. First of all, the Lega of Salvini, and now some of them even to Fratelli d'Italia. So certainly they are very different. In that sense, I said it might appear like that. But as a matter of fact, if you look at European readers, they might see some similarities between the Italian case and the Spanish case. And in that sense, if I had to read your table in an Italian way, I would say that populism must be articulated in a little, in a different way, according to the sign really of your coefficient. But I would like to know better what is in your mind and what is the role of Podemos anyway, especially in the backlash.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So I don't know if this is this table that you are referring to,
no,
but
probably
here
another one, previous one. There was something written about Podemos in small letters in one of
this one.
Yeah, probably here. Yes, exactly
this one.
Here.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so this what this says about Podemos, which is not it's much more restricted than the role of Podemos, but what it says here is that those people that consider themselves to be close to Podemos have relatively low levels of sexism compared to other people to start with, compared to the sympathizers of other parties. So they start here. Then they reduce even more these levels of sexism in 2018, and then they have a negligible backlash effect. So they don't suffer a backlash effect, as for instance compared to populist popular party people, or even well, in the case of PSOE, the backlash effect is also small. But you see that these supporters, they get themselves, they follow the tide of the feminist mobilization, and then they don't go back to higher levels of sexism. You can compare this to other sympathizers of other parties. You can see whether they have higher levels of sexism and lower levels of sexism. So in my view, Podemos is probably different it's similar in the sense that both Podemos and 5 Stelle have been considered populist parties. I think Podemos, both because of its origin, which is connected to the Communist Party in the end. So the people that are in the leading Podemos were members of United Left, which is the coalition that included the Communist Party. So originally they have a background of connected to the left, and they have also left the populist discourse, both because of internal party dynamics, because Errejón, who was the most convinced defendant of the populist strategy was kicked out, and because the party ideologically started to have a more clearly left-wing discourse, and because they are in government with the Socialist Party, all these has disconnected Podemos from its populist past. And you can see that with how populist attitudes relate to left-right. When we started looking at populist attitudes, they were connected to left-wing orientations, which in many countries in Europe they are not, because populist parties are connected to far right and radical right populist parties. So they started. Populism was a left-wing thing from an individual attitudes perspective, and in the way that populist attitudes are measured, this was a left-wing thing, and now it's shifting towards a right-wing thing, probably because of this shift of Podemos and of it becoming a party from the coalition government. So there is a lot of interesting stuff there on how Podemos has changed and its relationship to feminism and to sexism. On the relationship of Podemos with feminism, I can refer you to the paper by Manuela and Joanna, and I think they make this really great job in arguing that, you know, even if you are a left-wing party, you struggle as a populist party to incorporate women and feminists, not so much into the discourse, but especially into the internal dynamics. So it's a really interesting topic, but we haven't really looked at that because we were more concerned with explaining Vox. So the relationship between gender equality and Podemos would require more attention, and it's for me this is an interesting difference. This difference between the Socialist Party, that is the party where the socialist, where the institutional feminism is, but that on its base has higher levels of sexism than Podemos. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to explore. So thank you for the question.
Okay, so I think we are also actually running out of time. So perhaps if there is any like urgent last minute question, we just stop here and we will reconvene for the panels afterwards. Again, I would really like to, thank you, Eva, really for this super interesting presentation, for also showing something to my friend that I mentioned in the introduction. And really, I hope, to see this work like going further. Personally, I'm a big fan of your work on populism and also on populist attitudes. I think you really, helped us kind of reorienting some type of debates, also for what regards, the role played by emotions, fears, anger in the type of populist voting. So for, I think, any populist scholars, all your contributions are super relevant. And I'm very happy that you, shared this new research with us. So thank you very much again. And hope to see you all of you in a couple of